Hello there, this video is a reaction to the tentative Nami changes that were posted overnight on Wednesday. When I was initially making this on Thursday, I didn't know if there would be subsequent changes, but there were some that got instantly reverted, which suggests to me that there will be more, but I can only look at the changes on PBE, so that is what this video is. The PBE cycle takes a week or two before the changes hit live, so I thought I'd throw my hat in the ring because my reaction to them is that these are nerfs, even though they're not intended to be, although I could see them being beneficial in lower elo. I'm not counting the Thursday buffs, since they are apparently quickly reverted, but that does suggest to me that Riot recognises the initial changes will land on the weaker side. Most of this video was written and recorded before I saw the Thursday buffs, so do keep in mind that if there are subsequent changes, everything on PBE is subject to change, and I could be up to date by the time the video goes up. So from my perspective as a washed up low masters Nami main, she's been an A-tier pick for a while, not a problematic champion but also not weak, and I am fully aware that whenever Nami's changed, Riot wants to be very careful so she doesn't break pro play. However, I think these changes will be a detriment to her, and here's why. We'll get into some suggestions I have later on, and while I'd like to say up front that I'm not necessarily averse to what they're doing, it just feels like it was done with the goal of lowering her damage without much careful consideration of the impact. Here are the changes as I make this video. In summary, it's less damage on her W in exchange for more healing and 1 second off the cooldown, and the base damage on her E is being nerfed by up to 25% as you put points into it. The intent seems to be that we should not be maxing E first, and we should try to be more of a healer that peels dive champions as opposed to giving allies damage and looking to make picks with bubble. This is something that I and a lot of other Nami players aren't too happy with, because Nami's healing was never that good, and even after this it'll probably still be mediocre, and this kind of weakens her identity. Nami's identity as an enchanter has generally been that she's got a bit of everything, but doesn't excel in any one area. Bubble is AoE hard CC, but it's very unreliable and it's somewhat short range. W has a heal, but you'll be useless if you try to play like a dedicated healer, and you need to use the fact that it bounces and deals damage in order to actually establish favourable trades with it. Ult is AoE hard CC, but it's slow moving and narrow, so it's generally never used to engage a fight. However, as the seasons have gone on, she's not aged particularly well, and rather than being a support that's somewhat reliable and rewarding, she is generally either weak in the meta or an E-bot, neither of which are good game states. I understand the desire from Riot to discourage maxing E and to make her a more rounded enchanter again, but these changes won't hit the mark in my opinion. The cooldown buff won't really do anything in lane since we're very mana gated, and against good opponents you have to pick your trading windows carefully based on the positioning of the bot duos, rune cooldowns, etc. I don't think the cooldown buff will matter until you're out of the early levels and trying to skirmish or teamfight, and I think this cooldown buff was why Riot nerfed her W damage, so I question how good it really is. Overall, I think if it were just the changes to W, then it would probably be power neutral. I think they're being very cautious and considering low rank games where stuff like parallel positioning doesn't really matter. But the nerfs to E are horrible for her, and I think they will weaken her a lot, particularly as you go up the ladder. I am trying hard not to be biased here, especially since I am one of those Nami mains that like to max E, but that wasn't really about the damage since it was only slightly more than W. The purpose of an E max is to mitigate how easy bubble is to dodge for good players. Even without the mobility creep that has happened over the years that mean it is rather trivial to dodge, unless someone is CC'd or in the middle of a lengthy cast time, they can easily sidestep it. Having the stronger slow didn't guarantee a bubble, but it did make things more reliable, and if these changes go through then that isn't going to be an option. I am not saying it is necessarily wrong to discourage maxing E, since nobody likes Nami being an E-bot, but these changes don't seem to understand the state of Nami in Season 14. For one, I don't even think that having Nami be a healer is a good thing. I still agree with Mirillo's view about healers being a problematic archetype, so I don't think we should lean into Nami being a healer. I can understand the desire to not just buff her W damage since it isn't a skill shot, but it feels as if the first step was just to lower her damage, and then only her healing output was really considered as compensation. So, here are some changes I think could be looked at that avoid just buffing her damage. I'm not saying everything should be added all at once, and I can recognise that some changes would be hard to foresee the exact impact of. Base stats are always an option, not particularly interesting, but they are there. Nami has one of the lowest base health values in the game and one of the lowest health growth values in the game, for example. I can understand why, given that she has access to healing and her resistances are better than someone like Yumi or Sona. So in practice, she's not one of the squishiest champions in the game, but for Nami to be a healthy champion, she probably should be able to scrap a little bit better instead of sitting back and pressing spells on allies. Mana costs. As mentioned earlier, I don't think the cooldown buff on her W is really going to matter because she will run out of mana early, and it is not uncommon in the mid-game to be unable to keep up with the pace of the game. When W costs 110 mana at max rank, and that is what Riot wants us to use, then perhaps it should be toned down a little bit. Remove the cast time on W. This might seem a bit out of nowhere, but I think it might be something to look at for two reasons. The first is that she'd feel more fluid and modern. It always feels bad when it cancels due to lack of vision, for example, but also because of something minor I noticed a while ago. Did you know that if you use your Q or W to apply passive to speed yourself up, the cast time actually cancels it out and generally it slows you down? Link to that video if you weren't aware, but the current values for Nami's passive mean you should only ever use E to speed yourself up out of combat. I am okay with Q not being touched since that comes with a strong CC ability, but it would be nice to modernise her W slightly. Somewhat related to the previous point, but Nami's passive is very underwhelming in terms of how much value it gives. I understand this is because move speed in combat needs to be very finely tuned, but something that could be nice would be to give it the Sona treatment and have it linger for an extended duration out of combat to help with rotations, while not becoming oppressive in skirmishes. Give her W defined targeting rules. As far as I'm aware, there is nothing other than randomness which dictates where W will bounce to, but something such as bouncing to the lowest health ally for a heal could go a long way, but I do appreciate that this isn't as easy as other changes, so it's one of the least likely to happen. Make her E-slow more accessible or stronger without the need to put points in it. Riot have been very clear they want to discourage maxing E, and that it should not be dealing notable damage, and I'm not necessarily against this. No one likes E-bot Nami. It is bad for the game and uninteresting to play, but Emax gives much needed reliability to bubbles. A 15% slow isn't enough in lane when people have no boots and limited mobility, but when you take that past the first few levels and into the mid-game, that's basically useless and something has to be changed. I'm not saying I know what it should be, since every possible solution has problems. Level scaling is an issue because supports are often underleveled. AP scaling is an issue because high amounts of AP aren't easily accessible to supports. And you can't just buff the base value because that can cause problems with Bubble being too reliable in the early game. I absolutely do not think Bubble should be more reliable on its own, as it's an AoE stun that ignores minions and has a decent range. I completely understand why it's somewhat unreliable. Should ult be changed? Honestly no, I don't think there's anything meaningful you could do to make it good without it being oppressive. And I care more about Nami's base kit since that's what's more relevant in solo queue. At most, I'd say perhaps lower the cooldown a little bit, but it's not something I would do. Itemization, especially since Monday is being nerfed, which is a core item, I think it is worth talking about how heal and shield power isn't that good on her and it makes enchant items feel underwhelming. Maybe this changes with the healing and cooldown buffs, but she has one spell to apply stuff like Staff or Ardent, but he does also work with Airy. This means she tends to care more about supportive items that give her AP, like Mandate or Morello, because the gold she spends on heal and shield power when buying enchanter items does nothing appreciable. One thing that could be done to compensate for heal and shield power being less valuable on her than average for an enchanter could be to buff her mana regen in some way, so that stat is more valuable on her than average for an enchanter. And then finally, not a Nami thing, but please, buff Dwn Call. I don't know if I've got any rioters' attention with this video, but it feels so bad in general when it's meant to be the late game support item you're excited to buy. You can get a better stat profile from just buying an equivalently priced generic AP item, unless you really care about the heal and shield power. Even just making it so it acts as the enchanter wardstone that lets you carry pinks might make it attractive. Since no enchanter player is happy about building wardstone, but if you need pinks because you're against stealth champions, then you just have to deal with it. So those are my thoughts. I'd like to reiterate that I am trying to be constructive, and I understand the problems Riot are working with when it comes to Nami and how she can end up being a problem. I've tried to be as unbiased as possible, and if I'm wrong and Nami needs no follow-up buffs in 14.8, then great. And of course, if this is finally what stops ADCs that do not play Lucian from being mind-controlled into picking Lucian whenever I pick Nami, then you know what? I can live with Nami being terrible for a patch or two because he has been a scourge on us Nami mains for months. I will gladly see Nami drop to be a 47% win rate champion again, out of spite for Lucian if it means that the curse ADCs have that compels them to end the game when they see Nami. I feel like I have yapped enough, so thanks for watching and have a great week.